Hello and welcome to Journalists Hangout UK, where we discuss issues both African and worldwide which are affecting the continent. And we look at how those issues are seen at home and in the African diaspora. I'm Priscilla Nwigbo, and I'm pleased to welcome our panel today. First up, Ayo Johnson, journalist, speaker, and African affairs specialist. We also have Juliana Olayinka, journalist and broadcaster, and Maudu Jallo, student at the Department of International Developments at the London School of Economics. Welcome, everybody. How are we all doing today?
Right.
As usual, as we all know, you've all chosen individual subject matters to discuss. However, you will agree with me that the UK had a general election just last week, Thursday, and it is still the leading conversation everywhere. So, what did we all think? Ayo, let me come to you first.
Well, the Conservative leader said strong and stable, but more like weak and wobbly. Clearly, there's no doubt about that. She has had a huge challenge. The Labour Party are looking much more victorious psychologically, so interesting times to say. Okay.
Maudu, I know you predicted last week that, it was going to be a hung parliament. Congratulations, it happened. What do you think, what do you make of what's happening regardless?
I mean, some of that was just luck, I think, but also just looking at the polls coming in, it was quite close, and some, YouGov had it at about 1 point between the two. So I kind of saw, this looks like a hung parliament. Okay.
Yeah. Juliana, our female Prime Minister, the report is not the best at the moment. What do you make of it?
Well, it's awful. I might be in the minority, but I pity Theresa May. Brexit wasn't her decision. We're in the eve of Brexit. Like, as you said, she said she wanted a strong and stable government. Unfortunately, it is looking a bit weak and wobbly. But let's see, let's not forget the Conservatives still did win the majority of the vote. So they're a loser, but not as bad as people are making out, I don't think.
Okay. I mean, one of the good things about this election, we could say is that we've also seen a high number of Nigerian MPs. I wouldn't call them Nigerian MP, Nigerian heritage individuals that have been elected as MPs in this election. For instance, we have Kate Osama. Kate is representing Edmonton, and she was the Shadow Secretary of State for International Development. Chinyelu Onwora, in Newcastle Central, Shadow Minister for Business, Innovation and Skills. Chuka Umana, who we're all very aware of, representing Stratham, Shadow Secretary for Business. Fiona Onasanya, City of Peterborough, I believe she's, quite new. She's one of the new ones that has just come on board. Those four are representing for Labour Party. And then we have for the Conservative Party, Helen Grant, representing Maidstone and Weald, Olukemi Olufuntu Badenoch. I know my Nigerian audience are just going to be, why can't she say that name? But those, Olukemi Olufuntu Badenoch, representing Saffron Walden, and Beam Afolami representing Hitchin and Harpenden. I mean, congratulations to all of them.
Yes, exciting times. Clearly, we are an ethnic minority nation, so I think the Parliament should reflect just that, and I think this is a step in the right direction. I mean, the numbers are encouraging. Clearly, Africans are taking part in politics, they're encouraged, but we would like to see the numbers increase. Many are saying it should be far more, but I think a step in the right direction for British politics.
Okay. Juliana, what do you say?
I think it's amazing. I don't agree with all of their policies, of course, but Kate Osama, for example, she's a champion in the Nigerian community here in the UK. Of course, she's the all-party parliamentary chair on Nigeria. So it's really important because she's, of course, able to engage Nigerian politicians when they come here. She's able to engage the Nigerian community. So I think it is really important. As you said, Ayo, this is, I wouldn't say it's an ethnic minority country, but certainly in the capital where we are, you do see lots of different faces, and Nigeria is the largest diaspora.
Okay.
So I think
do
it's
need
important.
to come to Maudu. Time is not on our side. Thank you, Juliana. So Maudu, what do you think? Are you encouraged by the number of African heritage MPs that we're seeing?
I am encouraged, yes, but I think we need to separate sort of the people and their policies, right? As Juliana said, it's one thing to have them, in these positions of power, but what are they actually doing in terms of their policies to impact our communities? I think that's the most important thing.
Okay, that's good. I mean, it's interesting, and we wish them all the very best of luck. Let's see what happens, because we're all concerned. Aya, you want to say something very quickly?
Well, is the fact that the British Parliament is relying on the DUP at the moment to prop her up, so hopefully she can have a government that can deliver for the people, and I think it's going to be encouraging interesting time to see exactly how Labour reacts, and if at all we end up having another election.
Maudu, do you think we're likely to have another election soon?
I'm not sure. Jeremy Corbyn was quite confident about that on Andrew Marr the other day, but I think at this moment in time, he needs to focus on not just the strategy he has now, but expanding that strategy and bringing even more people in to this, you know, sort of Labour, quote-unquote, Labour coalition, and actually reaching out to some of the Blairites and the, you know, Brownites, you know, some people say, and trying to bring them on board around this, you know, very progressive, socially liberal stance that he's taken. And I think that can bring more people around the Labour Party and actually, you know, give them more success in coming elections.
Indeed. Juliana, we've been very busy with elections. My goodness, it's been every year, literally. Do you think we're about to suffer any election fatigue? Should there be any general election called soon?
I don't think so. I think it's really unlikely. Even if Theresa May she loses her position.
What's unlikely? The election or the fatigue?
I think it's well, there's definitely fatigue.
Okay.
Is it likely we're going to have another election? No. I think, you know, looking at David Cameron, he fell to the chop after calling a ballot, which is going to go down in history. Theresa May, people are saying she could be possibly, after this result, the worst Conservative parliamentarian ever. So I think it's unlikely anybody taking over her position will go to the ballot box, clearly because Labour is so strong at the moment.
Okay. That's really interesting, but let's look at the African citizens, for instance, in the UK here. Are we likely to see more participation with them, you know, in elections, in politics, and so on?
I mean, the number I was most proud about after the election was there was this number that came out, about 72% or so of young people came out to vote. And oftentimes these young people also happen to be from either disenfranchised, you know, backgrounds, or they happen to be from ethnic minorities, as Ayo said. And just to have that many people come out, and I think it reflected in the results, because Corbyn actually spoke to them with things like, you know, scrapping tuition fees and so on and so forth. And I would just like to point out, it's actually very ironic that the party that, you know, sort of went after Jeremy Corbyn for liaising himself with, you know, terrorists or people that are extremists, is now relying on, you know, sort of a former, or even some people argue existing, extremist, you know, party just to be able to form a parliament. I think it's fascinating. I've just been sitting back and enjoying it.
Juliana, do we think that the Tories are actually speaking to anybody? Because as Maudu just said there, Labour spoke to the young people with things like tuition fees. Are the Tories actually speaking to anybody? Their voters were like 50 and upwards, aged-wise.
Yeah, I think they are. You know, again, and I don't want to emphasise an obvious point, we've got the result right behind us. You know, the Conservatives were the majority party. Even though they don't have a majority to form their own government, they still got the most votes. So I do think the Tories are speaking to people, but they made a definite mistake in trying to run a presidential campaign. We all heard that, and we can see that Theresa May just wasn't the character. But talking about Jeremy Corbyn, you know, he was reaching out to rappers, to people on the street. You know, you can see him going out, hugging people, you know, giving them high fives, which Theresa May couldn't do. So he obviously related more.
Why couldn't she do it? I mean,
probably too stiff.
Her predecessor spoke about hugging a hoodie. So I mean, I don't know why she couldn't do it. But
she should have hugged a hoodie.
She should have hugged a hoodie. What do you think?
I think really, I think the elections were challenging for her. She was in the lead. The papers were telling her she would win by a landslide. She fell to that psyche and theology, and I think she was misguided, which is why some of her officers who were guiding her in that direction have lost their jobs today. But also I think once she realised the challenge ahead, and she realised that Jeremy Corbyn was a better speaker than her in public, she shied away from those opportunities that would have really shone him and put her in a bad light. So I think that combined were some of the reasons why the general public sort of moved towards Jeremy Corbyn. But we must say, with what Julian is saying, the Conservatives won. And of course, that's why they're in government today.
On that note, though, Conservative has won. However, there's still this anxiety, there's this concern, there's this fear. She can't form a government. She can form a government. She has her majority is not sufficient. What do we think we're likely to see in the coming days? Because there is huge concern out there. Are we going to see Theresa May remain as Prime Minister for the coming, 5 years, or is she likely to go?
Well, it all depends on what happens at the Queen's speech. If she can put together, which is why the Queen's speech has been delayed, never happened in history before, it's been delayed because of that.
Maybe delayed.
Well, there we go. She's got to tidy up her policies, make sure it appeals to a lot of people because she's going to need a lot of votes to come through. So if she comes through that, I can see her lasting the term. If she doesn't, then more than likely will be general election territory. And of course, Jeremy Corbyn has a chance. There are no guarantees, but it would be well fought. Yeah.
You know, Maudu, tell me something. What do you think we're likely to see in the coming days and weeks? Is she likely to hold on to as Prime Minister and take Britain forward? I
think in the short term, yes. I think I'm not expecting her to go anywhere in the short term. In the long term, I don't know. I don't think so. Anyway, I think eventually a challenge will come up. And there are already people plotting within the party, and some very influential, conservatives like George Osborne already talking about, maybe coming back into the fold, and he's writing in, his newspaper, the Evening Standard, about the Conservative Party. So I think he's slyly trying to, feel his way back in.
Let's very quickly, Juliana. We've just seen Michael Gove come back. I mean, what was all that about? Very quickly, what do you see happening there?
All I can say is that Theresa May, she's a seasoned politician. I pity her. It's not easy for women in politics.
No.
And she's taken a tough journey, and there will be some tough lessons. But she does have the wicked boys like Boris Johnson and Michael Gove on her corner, and those are the biggest plotters in the Tory government.
So very
short
quickly,
term, I think she'll be staying.
So, thank you. Ayo, what do you think?
Well, funny enough, we saw what Michael Gove did to Boris Johnson. They will be the ones that would plot against her.
Okay. And Maudu, very quickly, let's wrap up.
In terms of what I think is going to happen,
yes.
I think, like they said, there will be people within the party. I think there's a growing sort of sentiment within the Conservative Party that they need to look at Brexit again and maybe, possibly stay in the single market or negotiate a pro-business deal.
Thank you, Maudu. Time is no longer on our side. Well, we just have to wait and see. We're going to take a quick break now, but please do join us after the break when we'll be discussing the Democratic Republic of Congo's deepening political crisis. Is President Joseph Kabila going back on the power-sharing deal? Is Ethiopia about to run out of emergency drought aid? And Nigeria's Peugeot car assembly plant, is it attracting wealthy Nigerian investors as the government hoped? Join us in a few minutes. Hello and welcome back to Journalist Hangout UK. I'm Priscilla Nwigbo, and I'm pleased to welcome back our panel. Aya Johnson is still here. So is Juliana Olayinka and Maudu Jallow. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Let me come straight to you, Juliana. Your story is about the Congo. Before we went on the break, we were talking about the political turmoil here in the UK. And of course, in the Congo, there's also turmoil going on. Lead us on that.
Yeah, so it's the Democratic Republic of Congo. And of course, we talk about South Africa, we talk about Nigeria, we even talk about Kenya, but really, because of all the mineral wealth, and we're talking vast mineral wealth, in the DRC, it should be Africa's richest country, one of the world's richest countries, but it's been caught up in lots of political crises that have spanned more than a decade. Joseph Kabila, he is currently the president. He should have stepped down last year, December. He still hasn't gone. There has been a power sharing deal, which was agreed with the opposition at New Year. But it doesn't look like, the president is going to stick to those agreements. We can see from the pictures behind us that people have started registering for the ballot. But in an interview given just last week, Kabila said, he's made no promises that there will be an election held in 2018, and it's really worrying. I spent some time in Washington just a couple of months ago, and we talk a lot as Africans about all the wealth we've got, all of the oil, but we have no hard power. It's all soft power, and we need the youth to drive nuclear energy and just, lots of different things. It's very, very worrying. And I think the international community need to take more of a look at this. But of course, they're gaining so much.
Why the international community? Just just on that note of we need the youth to drive it, do you agree with Juliana that it's, you know, we'll be needing the youth to drive this?
No, definitely. I think most of Africans, you know, in terms of demographics, are young, right? So just in terms of sheer numbers, you know, it makes sense to mobilize the youth. And also we've seen it in places like Burkina Faso, where Blaise Compaoré was there for 37 years. The youth rose up, you know, burnt down the parliament. Before you knew it, he was out of there, right? So I think there's certain examples that can be used, but every case is different, right? So Congo has a long-standing history of instability, of, you know, divisions between, you know, states within the Congo. So it's very difficult. It's a complex situation. You know, we all hope for the best, of course.
Okay. Ayo, you know, we've spoken about the youth. We continually say this, but we hardly see it really happening. Is it because of a lack of education, political education for the youth, that, you know, we're not able to drive and pursue adequate leadership in the Congo and across Africa in general?
Well, in general, you're looking at fragile states, so that fragility always becomes apparent when there's a crisis, and this is exactly just that, a crisis. The DRC, for example, Mr. Kabila, he's been in power since 2001, when his father was shot, and 2006, 2011, we've had subsequent elections. Of course, you can tell that those elections he won, but were marred with so many inconsistencies, and those inconsistencies lied with the position I'm trying to explain. So combined with that, now he's saying he wants to stay in power for a third term, which is what people are assuming. He hasn't said that personally, but because we had problems in December, which were brokered by the Christian Church, and ultimately the arrangement was he would stay in power till the end of this year and have elections. But in this last couple of weeks, he's actually been choosing his members of his parliament and members of his team. So people are quite worried that he may not keep up with that.
All right, Juliana, very quickly, what are your final thoughts on this?
Well, it's very worrying, and we have to make a difference. It's not the Congo, it's the Democratic Republic of Congo, because they are two different countries. No, it's worrying, and it's just another case of an African leader, you know, just staying past his time. A lot of people are saying, though, that Kabila is very worried. His father was shot by his own security, and that if he comes out of power, he may be killed. So maybe a deal needs to be brokered, like we saw in the Gambia, where he can be given political asylum, but he has to go.
Thank you, Juliana. Ayo, let's come to your story about Ethiopia. Ethiopia is moving from a potential political crisis to a humanitarian crisis. You know, tell us about what's happening there.
Well, in the Horn of Africa, Ethiopia is one of the more stable of countries, but again, they're facing terrible times with potential starvation, famine, possibly, and of course the crops have failed. Many of the farming livestock have passed away, and of course many people are facing starvation. Now the government has said it needs help. The UN has said we can help, but you need best part of £1 billion. We can't give that to you because many countries around the world are not giving as much as they did previously. Yeah. So combined with that is why we're facing this problem. Wow. And of course there are many mouths to feed.
Juliana, I know Ethiopia has had a huge infrastructural development drive recently. What are your thoughts on this very quickly?
Well, yeah, we've got to give Ethiopia props. In the past 10 years, the economy has, I would say, not drastically turned around, but it has turned around. What we see of starving babies on British television isn't the Ethiopia of today, but unfortunately that area does exist. And you talk about stability. Let's not forget, you know, they do have a problem with terrorism. A lot of these areas are on the border with Somalia, which is very, very dangerous, very difficult to get aid in. And of course, internet has been blocked. Communication in Ethiopia at the moment is almost to zero. You can't even tweet, you can't speak to politicians to find out what's really going on. So it is extremely worrying. Wow.
Maudu?
I mean, I look at the situation and I think, you know, Ethiopia is still heavily dependent on aid, despite its, you know, economic advances. And the situation now is that there's a sort of separation between Addis Ababa and sort of the surrounding areas and relative affluence there, and sort of the rural areas, which due to climate change and sort of, you know, the exacerbation of the situation that you see, it's led to problems with food security and so on and so forth. But you see it in that whole region. You know, if you look at sort of Somalia, if you look at Sudan and northern Nigeria even, you know, there's a huge worry around that area due to climate change. Okay. And it's just going to get worse at this point.
Juliana, your final word on Ethiopia.
Well, you talk about Addis Ababa, you know, let's not forget, Ethiopia is almost seen as the capital of Africa. Every UN organisation and humanitarian hub is based there, and it would be nice for it to spread out. Another thing in Ethiopia, and that's a big problem, and we see it all across Africa, is tribalism. And, you know, a lot of tribes are marginalised, and it needs to stop. But hopefully, you know, things will improve. Ayo,
your final word.
Well, we're looking at a crisis for which people like Donald Trump, who are climate change deniers, this is clearly an example of how climate change has affected the entire part of Africa and the Horn of Africa. So clearly themselves and DUP, who are now forming a government with Theresa May, they're always climate change deniers. So there we go.
Thank you. Now, Maudu, I come to you now. Interesting story going on in Nigeria. From humanitarian funding to infrastructural funding. You've chosen the Nigerian Peugeot story, where Peugeot is now seemingly or trying to attract Nigerian investors. Lead us on that. Tell us about that.
I mean, this is a very important story because I think only industrialization, in my view, can lead to development. And the key issue here is what the Nigerian government is trying to do is, this plant has been around since 1972. It's not new, right? But what they're trying to do is revive it, give it new impetus, give it new funding, give policies that are favorable to the industry. So some of the things they've tried to do is, you know, increase import duty on second-hand cars, mainly from Japan. So because most of, you know, the market is taken up by them, you know, 85% of the local market in Nigeria for cars is second-hand, right? And that's an issue. So you can't have new cars being assembled expensively in Nigeria that can compete with second-hand cars coming in cheap. So the government has done that. They've sort of committed to that. And also another thing they've done is they're looking for, you know, investors at the moment. And also they're saying, we can support you. For example, you know, the MPs in Nigeria, some of the, you know, people and officials in government have committed that they'll use locally produced cars in order to boost the industry.
Have they really?
Yes.
Juliana, do you agree that they've committed to using locally produced cars?
They may have committed, but, you know, they've committed to loads of things.
I'm aware that their car budget is quite huge, really.
I like this story. Again, you know, this is another happy-go-lucky, we wish happy ever after story in Nigeria, but I'm not sure what it's going to come to. You know, let's be frank. I've been to Lekki, I've been to some of the really nice spots in Nigeria, and they're not driving Peugeots, they're driving Range Rovers, they're driving Porsches. The people that Peugeot would try to attract are just not interested in this brand of car. 90% of Nigerians are earning 20,000 naira a month, which I'm not sure how much that is now, probably about £100. Can they afford these kind of cars? I don't think so. I think there are lots of other areas where Nigerian investors should be investing their money, and unfortunately cars that are just not going to sell is not where they should be putting their money.
Ayo, do you agree, disagree? I see your eyes there telling me a different story.
Well, it's not about the numbers. It's not about those who are engaged. It's about sending the right signals that Nigeria is open for business, it can attract this type of investment, and hopefully that would attract more investment in a whole different type of areas, and hopefully it would help to develop the country.
Thank you. That was really sharp. So, your final word, Maudu.
I mean, I don't necessarily disagree with Juliana, but I think what the key issue here is that what they're doing is bringing in more of the value chain into Nigeria, and what that does is value addition and so on and so forth. And it's the sort of baby steps towards manufacturing and towards industrialization. And what the least that you know Nigerians can do is to have a concerted effort to sort of support this, so that other car companies, and I think Ford as well, committed to producing cars locally in Nigeria as well. So you know, it's the beginning of something, and if it's supported, it can lead to something really good.
Thank you. So, final words from both of you, very quickly.
Well, I think it's exciting for Nigeria, it's exciting for the car industry, and above all, it's showing that real incomes are hopefully going to go somewhere whereby they can actually be able to afford these expensive cars.
Thank you. Juliana, one line.
Unfortunately, the majority of Nigerians can barely afford to send their children to school. A car is the least of their concerns at the moment.
All right. Well, thank you very much to all of you. Thank you, Ayo Johnson. Thank you, Juliana Olayinka. Thank you, Maudu Jallo. I'm Priscilla Winkle from the entire team here in London. Goodbye, and thank you for watching Journalist Hangout UK, and see you soon.